I executed a man before breakfast, and the only reason I remember his face is because my visor recorded it for the log, because without that cold machine reminder he would already be dissolved into the endless slurry of bodies, smoke, and regret that make up a Hive morning, and that is how every patrol begins in Hive 40K, not with silence or calm or the illusion of order, but with violence arriving early and demanding to be acknowledged. And as I step off the Arbites transport into the choking half-light of the lower mid-hive, I already know that today will be worse than most because the air tastes wrong, too metallic, too heavy, the kind of air that settles in your lungs and whispers that something has shifted while you were sleeping, and the city knows it before you do. The city always knows first, the distant machinery groaning like an injured animal, the worker sirens screaming their false promise of productivity, the masses pouring out of hab blocks with their eyes down, and their souls already spent, all of them moving aside instinctively as my boots hit the ferrocrete because they know what we are even if they never look directly at us. Black armor, sealed helmets, the Aquila stamped over the chest like a warning rather than a symbol, Adeptus Arbites, the law-given legs and a shotgun, and my partner Karsk walks beside me without a word, his gait uneven from an old injury that never healed right, but his grip on his weapon steady, always steady, because in the Hive you can limp or you can hesitate, but you cannot do both and survive, and I register the first sound of gunfire before my conscious mind catches up, a single crack echoing down the gantry above us. A round whining past my helmet close enough that my auto senses flash a polite warning icon, as if politeness still matters down here. And I don't duck because if you flinch every time the Hive tries to kill you, then you'll never get anywhere. Instead I exhale slowly and raise my shotgun, voxing. Calm contact reports while workers scatter like spilled insects, and the city continues pretending this is all normal, because it is. Because in Hive 40K's death is not an interruption to daily life, it is a background process, and the shooter reveals himself with the second shot, muzzle flash flaring briefly through the grime and hanging cables, some desperate idiot with more anger than planning, and we move without shouting because noise draws worse things than lone snipers, Karsk flanking. Right, me advancing left, our boots clanging against rusted stairs and cracked plasteel. And as I climb I think, not for the first time, that the Imperium does not need monsters to enforce it, it just needs men willing to stop feeling surprised by cruelty, and when I reach the upper gantry the shooter bolts, young, thin, shaking, leaping across a gap that looks wider than it is, and I don't hesitate because hesitation is a luxury the Hive burned out of me years ago. I fire once, the recoil. Familiar, comforting, the shot clean, the body tumbling down into the depths where gravity finishes what doctrine began, and by the time I reach him he's still breathing, which is inconvenient, because the law is clear and mercy is inefficient, and he's sobbing now, saying something about hunger, about needing ration chits, about how the overseers cut their allotments again, and none of that matters, not to the Lex Imperialis. Not to the city that chews up its own young and calls it stability. And I feel that old weight settle in my chest, the one that never quite goes away, the knowledge that order here is not built on justice but on fear carefully maintained. And Karsk looks at me, waiting, always making me decide, because he knows I'll carry it longer, and I give the order, my voice flat, professional, amplified to erase any trace of doubt. And the execution is fast, clean, logged, another line item in a system so vast it barely notices individual lives being erased. And as sanitation servitors trundle closer, already scraping blood into drains, my visor pings with a new alert, multiple disturbances, lower sectors, unusual patterns, bodies reported arranged rather than dumped, symbols scratched into walls that don't match known gang tags. And that is when I feel it properly, the shift in the Hive's mood, the sense that today is not just another patrol, that something beneath the endless crime and misery has started organizing itself, thinking, and as we move back into the flow of the waking city, past workers who refuse to meet our gaze and children who stare too long because they haven't learned fear properly yet, I realized that the execution this morning wasn't the start of my day, it was the warning, because when the Hive starts leaving messages instead of bodies, it means someone believes the law can bleed, and soon, very soon, I will have to decide how much blood it takes to remind them otherwise. By the time anyone arrived, the killers were gone, and of course they were, because this was planned, because whoever did this knew exactly how long they had, and Karsk calls me over to the fountain, where dried blood trails lead toward a maintenance hatch hanging slightly ajar, hazard stripes worn almost smooth with age, and the sight of it sends a ripple of unease through the watching crowd, because everyone knows those tunnels, the forgotten arteries beneath the city where things go to hide and rot, and I crouch, tracing the prints with my eyes, multiple sets, at least 3, maybe more, staggered but purposeful, no sign of panic, which tells me these weren't amateurs riding a frenzy, they were calm, coordinated, and confident they wouldn't be followed, and I straighten slowly, letting the weight of that realization settle, because confidence like that is earned, and as we secure the area further, I notice smaller details, scraps of blue fabric clenched in one victim's fist, a faint scent of incense clinging to the air that doesn't match anything sold in this sector, and my visor logs it all, but the machine can't tell me what I really need to know, which is why now, why here, and as we move along the perimeter, I catch sight of a child watching from a broken stairwell, eyes wide, face smeared with grime, and for a moment our gazes lock, and I see something there that unsettles me more than the bodies, not fear, but curiosity, as if he's trying to understand what kind of violence earns this much attention, and I break the stare first because this isn't about him, not yet, and Karsk joins me, voice low, pointing out the pattern formed by the bodies, how it aligns almost perfectly with the old transit maps of this level, nodes and junctions long abandoned, and my stomach tightens again because that suggests planning beyond this plaza, suggests this is one point in a larger design, and suddenly the Hive feels less like chaos and more like a board being set, and I give the order to seal the area and call in forensic servitors, knowing full well that by the time they finish cataloging what's left, whoever did this will already be moving, and as the enforcers scramble to comply, relieved to have direction again, I take one last look at the scene, at the bodies that were never meant to be mourned, only noticed, and I realize something else that makes my jaw clench behind the helmet. These weren't chosen for who they were, but for what they represented, anonymous workers, interchangeable, symbols of the mass, and killing them like this sends a very specific message to the Hive, that anyone can be made an example, that order is fragile, and as we step away from the plaza and toward the maintenance hatch, weapons ready, lights cutting into the dark, I feel the city watching us, waiting to see if the law still knows how to descend into its own underbelly, because whatever left those bodies behind is counting on the Hive's fear to do half the work for them, and I have the uneasy certainty that this is only the opening move, and the next one will be louder. The hatch groans like something alive when we force it open, a sound that echoes down the maintenance shaft and makes the watching crowd recoil as if the Hive itself has just exhaled something it wanted to keep buried, and as Karsk drops first, weapon raised, I follow without hesitation, boots hitting the ladder rungs slick with old moisture and newer blood, the smell down here thicker, heavier, layered with mold, rust, and a faint sweetness that sets my teeth on edge because it doesn't belong. And the light from above shrinks quickly until it's just another distant glow swallowed by shadow, replaced by the cold white beams of our helmet lamps cutting through the dark, revealing walls scarred with decades of neglect and newer marks scratched hastily over older ones, symbols overlapping symbols, like arguments fought in blood and chalk by people who never expected to be heard. And the deeper we descend, the quieter it gets, the constant Hive noise fading into a low, oppressive hum that vibrates through the metal and into my bones, and I realize with a flicker of unease that this silence isn't absence, it's anticipation, because places like this are never empty, they're just waiting, and the tunnel opens into a wider conduit where the air grows warmer and damp, condensation dripping steadily from overhead pipes like a slow, patient countdown, and there on the floor, illuminated by our lights, are the tracks again. Clearer now, smeared footprints leading onward in a deliberate path, not scattered, not panicked, and Karsk crouches, fingers brushing near one of the prints without touching it, confirming what we both already know: multiple individuals moving together, not running, which means whatever ritual happened above wasn't an end, it was a beginning. And as we advance deeper, our vox picks up faint interference, a low static hum that wasn't there before. Not enough to block communication, but enough to irritate, like a whisper just out of hearing range, and I catch myself adjusting my helmet filters even though the readings show nothing out of tolerance. And that's when we hear it, not footsteps, not voices, but something rhythmic, distant, a sound that could almost be machinery except for the irregular cadence, too organic, too intentional. And my pulse quickens because I've heard that sound before, years ago, in a different hive, on a different patrol that ended with more bodies than answers. And as we move closer, the walls begin to change, less industrial, more improvised. Scrap plating welded over old supports, cables rerouted, makeshift power feeds humming weakly, evidence that someone has been living down here, organizing, adapting. And that thought unsettles me more than any ambush would, because organization requires leadership, and leadership requires belief, and belief is the most dangerous weapon in the hive. And then we see the shrine, if it can be called that, a repurposed alcove where an Imperial Aquila once stood, now defaced, broken, its wings snapped and laid at its base like discarded tools, and in its place stands a crude altar assembled from transit signage and bolted scrap, candles guttering atop it, their flames casting warped shadows that make the symbols painted on the walls seem to writhe when you look too long. And Karsk curses under his breath as my visor finally finds a partial match in restricted archives. Fragmented references to a movement suppressed decades ago, one that preached renewal through destruction, dawn through fire, and the pieces start aligning in my mind in a way I don't like, because that kind of ideology doesn't spread by accident. It spreads because it resonates, because it tells people what they want to hear, that their suffering is not meaningless, that it is fuel. And before I can process that further, movement flickers at the edge of my vision, a figure retreating into the shadows beyond the shrine, too slow to be a trick of the light, and I signal Karsk silently, both of us shifting stances, weapons trained, advancing in measured steps, and the tunnel opens into a small chamber beyond, lit by a single flickering lumen strip. And there, kneeling on the floor amid chalk circles and scraps of parchment, is a woman, older than I expected, hair matted, skin etched with self-inflicted symbols, her lips moving in a low chant that makes my skin prickle even through layers of armor. And for a moment we watch her, this lone figure in the dark, and I feel a strange tension then. Not fear, but recognition, because she isn't hiding, she's performing, and that means she expects an audience. And when I step forward and order her to stand, my voice amplified and sharp, she looks up slowly, eyes burning with a fervor that has nothing to do with surprise, and she smiles, actually smiles, as if this is exactly how she hoped the moment would unfold. And she speaks before I can repeat the command, her voice hoarse but steady, telling us we are too late, that the message has already been delivered, that the hive is waking up. And something in her tone makes my jaw tighten, because she believes it, not as a threat, but as a certainty. And when Karsk moves to restrain her, she resists with a strength that doesn't match her frame, thrashing, clawing, screaming phrases about chains breaking and tyrants falling. And it takes both of us to force her down, shock restraints snapping closed around her wrists as she laughs through bloodied teeth. And in that laughter I hear something worse than madness. I hear confidence, and as I search her belongings I find the proof: crude pamphlets printed on stolen administrative stock, diagrams of tunnel networks, dates and times marked with careful precision, and a name repeated again and again at the top of each page: Children of the New Dawn. And my stomach drops, because this isn't a cell acting alone, It's a network, recruiting, planning, and the plaza above was only the signal flare. And as the woman finally slumps, sedated but still murmuring promises of what's to come, I realize with chilling clarity that today's patrol has already crossed a line, because once belief takes root in the hive, the law doesn't just have to enforce order anymore, it has to compete with hope, and that is a fight that never ends cleanly. We don't leave the tunnels immediately because experience has taught me that movements like this never rely on a single voice or a single hideout, and as the woman is hauled away by a rapid response unit, still whispering prophecies through swollen lips, I order a deeper sweep despite the protests crackling through the vox from above, because command always wants certainty wrapped up neatly and quickly, and the hive never provides either. And as we push farther into the underlevels, the architecture grows stranger, less imperial, more improvised, entire sections rerouted and reinforced by hands that learned engineering from necessity rather than schematics, and I realize with a slow, sinking weight that this wasn't built in weeks or months but over years, quietly, patiently, while everyone else was too busy surviving to notice, and that is when the first trap triggers. Not an explosion but a sudden blackout, lumen strips dying all at once and plunging the corridor into a darkness so complete my helmet compensates a half-second too late, long enough for the ambush to spring, shapes rushing from side tunnels, blades flashing, autogun fire erupting in tight bursts, disciplined, controlled, nothing like the panicked spray of gangers, and we return fire instantly, training overriding thought, the tunnel filling with thunder and smoke, my shotgun bucking as I drop the first attacker, then the second, their bodies hitting the floor hard, real human, not demons or monsters, just people who decided the law was the enemy, and Karsk takes a round in the shoulder, armor holding but the impact staggering him, and I drag him behind a support pillar as the firefight intensifies, Vox channels erupting with overlapping reports as Arbites units engage across multiple junctions, confirming my worst fear. This wasn't a hideout, it was a hub, and the children of the new dawn are everywhere down here, moving with purpose, falling back in coordinated patterns, forcing us to advance or retreat on their terms, and in the chaos I catch fragments of their shouted chants, references to dawn, to cleansing fire, to a future where the hive will burn and be reborn, and I feel a flash of cold anger because I've heard this rhetoric before, always from those who won't live long enough to see the ashes they promise others, and as we push forward inch by inch, bodies piling up, the tunnels begin to glow with emergency lighting, bathing everything in a sickly red that makes blood indistinguishable from shadow, and through it all there's a sense of momentum, of something building toward a release, and then we reach the chamber, a vast maintenance hall repurposed into a gathering space, rows of crude benches, banners stitched from stolen fabric, the defaced Aquila repeated again and again, and at the far end a raised platform where a man stands waiting, tall, broad, armored in scavenged plates etched with the same symbols we saw above, his presence commanding, in a way that makes the remaining cultists rally even as Arbites' fire cuts them down, and he raises his hands not in surrender but in welcome, shouting over the gunfire that we are proving his point, that the Imperium only knows how to answer questions with bullets, and for a heartbeat, a dangerous one, I see the flicker of doubt in some of the workers pressed against the walls, caught between fear of us and belief in him, and that is when I understand the true threat here, not the weapons or the tunnels or even the ideology, but the fact that he's charismatic, that he knows how to speak to the exhausted and the forgotten. And I don't give him time to continue ordering a full charge because speeches are weapons too, and the room erupts into close quarters chaos, shotgun blasts at arm's length, shock mauls cracking against bone, screams echoing off the high ceiling, and somewhere in the crush Karsk goes down again, this time hard, and I feel a spike of panic I don't allow myself to acknowledge, because stopping means dying, and I fight my way toward the platform, bodies blurring past, the leader retreating step by step, still shouting, still smiling, until he reaches a control console behind the dais, his hand slamming down on a rune just as I fire, the shot tearing into his side but not stopping him from triggering whatever he planned, and the floor shudders violently, alarm screaming as the chamber's far wall begins to split, revealing a massive blast door I hadn't seen, and through the widening gap pours heat, light, and the roar of industrial furnaces coming online after decades of dormancy, and the cult leader laughs then, blood bubbling at his lips, shouting that this is only one spark, that the hive will remember today as the moment it learned to burn, and before I can reach him he collapses, dead or dying, it doesn't matter because the damage is done, and I order an immediate withdrawal as the chamber becomes unstable, structural integrity warnings flashing across my visor, Arbites dragging wounded comrades back through collapsing tunnels while cultists scatter or burn in the sudden inferno, and as we retreat, coughing, armor scorched, I glance back once to see the banners curling and igniting, the symbols dissolving into flame, and I know with a sick certainty that while we may have broken this hub, we fed the narrative they wanted, violence answered with greater violence, proof in their minds that the law is afraid of what they represent. And when we finally emerge into the upper levels, smoke rising from multiple sectors as emergency sirens wail across the hive, I'm struck by the realization that this raid wasn't an ending or even a victory, it was an escalation, and the cost of order today will be paid tomorrow in blood we haven't even seen yet. By the time the fires are contained and the smoke thins enough for the hive to pretend it can breathe again, I'm standing on a high transit bridge overlooking 3 sectors locked down under Arbites authority, the city below lit by emergency lumens and burning furnaces that paint everything in a permanent dusk. And the official report scrolling across my visor tells a story I barely recognize: successful suppression, ringleader neutralized, infrastructure damage contained, civilian casualties within acceptable parameters. And I almost laugh at that last part because there is nothing acceptable about the way the hive sounds tonight. Too quiet in places it should roar, too loud where panic hasn't settled yet, and Karsk is alive, barely, strapped into a med transport with his armor cut away and blood pooling beneath him. His last words to me before they seal the doors a dry joke about how he always hated tunnels anyway, and I nod and tell him he'll be back on patrol soon even though we both know injuries like that never really leave you, they just wait, and command pings me again, demanding confirmation that the threat is neutralized. And I hesitate for a fraction of a second too long before responding because deep down I know better, because movements like the Children of the New Dawn don't die with their leaders. They metastasize, they adapt, they turn martyrs into fuel, and as I walk through the aftermath, past workers being herded back into habs under armed watch, past enforcers scrubbing blood from walls already stained beyond redemption, I catch fragments of conversation, whispered questions about what really happened, about why the furnaces came online, about whether the Arbites knew this was coming, and that uncertainty gnaws at me, because uncertainty is where rebellion breeds. And back at the precinct fortress, a brutal slab of stone and steel rising defiantly above the lower hive, I'm ushered into a briefing chamber where hololithic maps flicker to life, red markers blooming across them like a spreading infection, intercepted transmissions, coded symbols found in unrelated sectors, reports of workers skipping shifts, of shrines being defaced, of pamphlets circulating faster than we can confiscate them, and the senior adjudicator speaks calmly about resource allocation and preemptive arrests. But I'm barely listening because my eyes are drawn to a single data point flagged in amber, a transmission fragment recovered from a burned terminal in the tunnels, timestamped just minutes before we breached the chamber, and when I isolate it and play it back, the voice that emerges is distorted but unmistakably confident, thanking listeners for their faith, telling them the first dawn has broken, and promising that the next will be impossible to ignore, and I feel a chill then that no armor can stop, because this wasn't a call to arms, it was a reassurance. And reassurance means preparation is already complete. And later, as night cycle settles and the hive's lights dim in uneven patches, I patrol again, because paperwork can wait and sleep is a rumor, and the bridge creaks beneath my boots as I move through a sector untouched by today's violence, where life continues in its miserable routine, vendors hawking recycled food, children playing in the grime, couples arguing softly over nothing and everything, and for a moment it's almost peaceful. And that's when I see it, a small mark etched into a support pillar, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it, the same angular symbol from the plaza, smaller now, subtler, easy to miss, and my pulse quickens as I scan the surrounding walls, finding more, faint but deliberate, spread just far enough apart to suggest coordination. And I realized with a sinking weight that while we were fighting in the tunnels, the message was still moving, carried by hands we never saw, and as I log the symbols and call for a wider sweep, a child brushes past me, eyes down, clutching a folded scrap of paper. An instinct makes me stop him, my shadow falling over his small frame, and when he looks up there's fear there, yes, but also something else, something dangerously close to hope, and I take the paper from his trembling fingers, unfolding it slowly to reveal a crude drawing of a sun rising over a burning hive, the words beneath it shaky but legible, the dawn is coming, and I let the paper fall, ordering him home in a voice that brooks no argument, watching him disappear into the crowd, and for the first time in years I feel truly tired, not in my body but in my soul, because this is the part of the job no one prepares you for, the realization that the law can crush bodies and burn banners and silence voices. But it cannot erase ideas once they've learned how to hide, and as I resume my patrol, the city stretching endlessly ahead of me, I understand that there will be no clean victory here, no final raid that restores order and lets us rest, only an endless cycle of pressure and response, fear and defiance. And tomorrow I will execute another man before breakfast, and the day after that another. Because that is what the Adeptus Arbites do. We endure, we enforce, we become the wall the hive breaks itself against again and again, even as cracks form we pretend not to see, and somewhere deep beneath my armor, beneath doctrine and duty, a dangerous thought stirs, not sympathy, not doubt, but the awareness that this city is changing whether the law approves or not. And as I disappear into the shadows of the hive, weapon ready, senses sharp, I know with absolute certainty that the next patrol will be worse, and the one after that worse still, because the hive has heard the promise of a new dawn, and it will take oceans of blood to convince it the night is eternal.